What I have so far sought to show is that there is wide, persistent, and seemingly irresolvable disagreement over the criteria for applying the concept of morality, over what lies within the scope of moral appraisals and judgments and what does not. Philosophers disagree not only about the best or appropriate way to reach and justify moral judgments, but also over what moral judgments are, over how to define what morality is. Anthropologists and psychologists are similarly non-convergent. Indeed, it would seem that the differing answers to this question are inextricably tied to different moral outlooks. That how one conceives of morality reveals and expresses one's own morality, that is, one's first-order moral judgments, values, and principles. However, this is not the only sense in which morality may be thought of as multiple. For, as Charles Taylor has observed, one of the big illusions shared by moral philosophers is the belief that there is a single consistent domain of the moral, that there is one set of considerations or mode of calculation which determines what we ought morally to do. As I shall now argue, it is by no means obvious that morality names a unified object or field. Is there any reason to think that the moral domain is unified by a distinctive set of common concerns? The anthropologist Richard Schweder and his colleagues have proposed the hypothesis, based on fieldwork in India, that there are in all cultures three broad domains of moral discourse, three culturally coexisting discourses of morality, namely the ethics of autonomy, the ethics of community, and the ethics of divinity. Their idea is that within the Hindu social order, these foster different types of goods, each indispensable and all enhancing human dignity and self-esteem, and that, in general, cultures differ in the degree to which one or another of the ethics and corresponding moral goods predominate in the development of social practices and in the elaboration of a moral ideology. With similar implications, but in a different idiom, the psychologists Jonathan Haidt and Craig Joseph have proposed that one should think of morality as modular. Their focus is on moral intuitions, fast and automatic responses to specific environmental triggers that they conceive as primitive and innate, or at least innately prepared in the human evolutionary past, and as undergirding the moral systems that cultures develop, including their understandings of virtues and character. They suggest that there are four such modules that correspond to distinct stimuli, namely suffering, hierarchy, reciprocity, fairness, and purity. In addition, they add a possible fifth in-group module with the associated emotion of loyalty. They think of such intuitions as distinct pattern recognition systems that often launch moral emotions and generate distinct complexes of what are seen as virtues in different cultures. In addition, elsewhere, Haidt has suggested that distinct emotions are elicited by distinct kinds of immorality. In general, Wright, Haidt, and Joseph, morality is innate as a small set of modules and socially constructed as sets of interlocking virtues. Morality, on such views, in short, is composed of non-unified, distinct elements that, in combination, yield different social moralities. Should we, then, think of morality as socially constructed, and what would that thought precisely amount to? Here we can find help from Ian Hacking's checklist of the three component ideas that the notion of social construction comprises, namely 1. Contingency, the thought that what is claimed to be socially constructed could have been quite otherwise, so that, for example, there could have been an equally successful physics, in no sense equivalent to existing physics. 2. Nominalism, the thought that our categories and classifications are not fixed by the nature of things or the structure of the world, but by our linguistic conventions. And 3. Externalism, the thought that we believe what we do not because of the reasons that appear to justify what we believe, but because of factors such as the influence of the powerful, or of social interests, or of institutional imperatives, or of social networks. Beginning with the last, it is clear that just as free lies at the origin of the sociology of knowledge, so comparably it sets out part of what must be the agenda of the sociology of morality, namely the role of the powerful and dominant interests, and alongside them, moral entrepreneurs within social institutions and networks, in drawing moral boundaries, imposing moral standards, inculcating moral ideologies, and defining moral virtues. Clearly, it embraces a vast array of existing sociological works, both historical and contemporary, that examine the extent of and limits to such influence, from studies of the respectable poor and of forms of patriarchy to contemporary studies of evangelical Christianity or the teaching of ethics in business schools, and also the various reformist and conflict-reducing uses of moral power, as discussed in this volume by Jar Mehta and Christopher Winship. Seeing such work and future such studies through this lens helps focus attention on the social actors and social determinants that to a greater or lesser extent influence what I have called low conceptions of morality. However, it also, of course, helps focus attention on the manifold ways in which individuals and groups escape and resist such influences. Huckleberry Finn was acting morally when he resisted his duty to turn in Jim, the slave, as were those who rescued and protected Jews during the Holocaust, and there was a moral life within the concentration camps. Thus, for instance, a moral sociology in this vein would attend to moral codes generated within countercultural and deviant subcultures, but also to what James Scott calls the arts of resistance. Scott, who focuses on domination in highly stratified societies and institutions, suggests that there are two kinds of evidence of such resistance. On the one hand, there are the hidden transcripts generated in secluded settings behind the scenes in the victim's life, apart in the slave quarters, the village, the household, and in religious and ritual life, in a social space in which offstage descent to the official transcript of power relations may be voiced in forms such as linguistic disguises, ritual codes, taverns, fairs, the hush arbors of slave religion, and consisting in hopes of a returning prophet, ritual aggressions via witchcraft, celebration of bandit heroes, and resistance martyrs. On the other hand, there are the open but disguised expressions of ideological insubordination that can be decoded by interpreting the rumors, gossip, folktales, songs, gestures, jokes, and theater of the powerless as vehicles by which, among other things, they insinuate a critique of power, while hiding behind anonymity or behind innocuous understandings of their conduct. 1 and 2, however, raise a different kind of question, namely, whether there are limits to what can be constructed in the name of morality. Specifically, can we adduce reasons based on natural facts, facts about human nature and about how human beings interact socially, for fixing boundaries around what is to count as morality, within which variation occurs, thereby setting an agenda for the sociology of morality? Is there a prospect of identifying a distinctive transhuman way in which people interact and relate to one another, which will satisfy the following three demands? 1. That it is compatible with most commonly accepted meanings of morality and moral. 2. That it is compatible with the main alternative philosophical theories of morality. And 3. That it allows for wide variation in empirical realizations in the form of moral judgments, behavior, codes, and practices. The philosopher P. F. Strawson made two suggestions that I believe offer, in combination, a promising way of answering this question. In the first place, Strawson wrote that certain human interests are so fundamental and general that they must be universally acknowledged in some form and to some degree in any conceivable moral community, allowing for the possible diversity of moral systems and the possible diversity of demands within a system. Strawson wrote, the recognition of certain general virtues and obligations will be a logically or humanly necessary feature of almost any conceivable moral system. There will include the, the abstract virtue of justice, some form of mutual aid, and to mutual abstention from injury, and in some form and in some degree the virtue of honesty. In a later, justly famous and influential essay, Strawson developed a further idea that significantly advances this naturalistic approach, namely the claim that there is a range of distinctive reactive attitudes that have common roots in our human nature and our membership of human communities. Strawson 2008, page 29. These participant reactive attitudes are essentially natural human reactions to the good or ill will, or indifference of others towards us as displayed in their attitudes and actions. They reveal how much we actually mind, how much it matters to us, whether the actions of other people, and particularly of some other people, reflect attitudes towards us of goodwill, affection, or esteem on the one hand, or contempt, indifference, or malevolence on the other. As evidence, Strawson cites the difference it makes to us whether or not we see an injury we incur as resulting from the actions of an agent or agents for which he or they were responsible, and there is a range of different reasons why they might not be. Strawson's suggestion is made in the context of discussing free will and determinism, a discussion into which we will not enter. Here, the key point to notice is his claim that our natural human commitment to these ordinary interpersonal attitudes is part of the general framework of human life. His idea, in short, is that human beings naturally engage in the practice of holding one another responsible for benefits and injuries, and in doing so display a range of attitudes that respond to what they perceive as good or ill will, or indifference of others, and that these attitudes express an engaged first-person perspective of participants in the practice. Which are these reactive attitudes, these non-detached attitudes or reactions of people directly involved in transactions with each other? Strawson first offers a few examples. Attitudes and reactions of offended parties and beneficiaries, such things as gratitude, resentment, forgiveness, love, and hurt feelings, observing that they arise in ordinary interpersonal relationships, ranging from the most intimate to the most casual. But then he develops a typology of three kinds of such attitudes. 1. Personal attitudes, such as resentment, with which react directly to ill will or indifference of others to ourselves. 2. Sympathetic or vicarious attitudes. These are impersonal or disinterested or generalized analogues of the first kind. These rest on and reflect exactly the same expectation or demand in a generalized form for the manifestation of goodwill and regard on the part of others, not simply towards oneself, but towards all those on whose behalf moral indignation may be felt, i.e., as we now think, towards all men. And just as one concerns demands on others for oneself, and 2. Concerns demands on others for others, there are 3. Self-reactive attitudes associated with demands on oneself for others, notably feeling bound or obliged, the sense of obligation, feeling compunction, feeling guilty or remorseful, or at least responsible, and the more complicated phenomenon of shame.